5:30.
Way upstairs.
Very good.
What is that about?
There we go. You okay with going ahead without Alyssa, who is on her way? Yes.
I mean, you were the vice mayor today, of all days, so.
Bill, you okay if we go ahead? I'll go ahead and call this meeting. Gwen, roll call, please.
Yes, Councilmember Hoskint,
Yeah.
Councilmember Lauritsen,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Joyner,
Here. And Councilwoman Silhai is going to be here shortly, and the mayor is in Washington DC and unable to attend today. So if you would all please stand and join me. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands,
one
nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We move on to item 3, public comment. Anyone wishing to make a comment on an item not on today's agenda would be the time to do so. Mary, Richard, no?
It's on the agenda.
Okay. Then we shall move on to staff reports. Item 4A, receive a presentation, review information, and provide direction to the staff for the fiscal year 2022-2023 proposed budget. Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to lead in for Nita here. We're really excited to present this workshop this evening. We have, both Nita and I came into the budget process here later than would be normal. And so, normally we'd be having this workshop, which is almost a month ago. But it was important to us to do a couple things. First off is to make sure that we both fully understood the past budgetary practices here in Lincoln, thought a little bit about some of the things that really could use some cleanup in future years. And then obviously the most important part, which is building our work plan and fiscal forecast for next year. And so what she's going to step you through this evening is the highlights of what we consider the most important funds of many, which are the general fund, our 4 enterprise funds, which are airport, water, sewer, and garbage. And also some information on staffing and capital requests that we're going to be recommending, not this coming meeting, but the following meeting on budget adoption. The other thing that you'll notice is that our general assessment about the previous budgetary practice, while the calculations have been generally very good, what we think has been missing is a longer term analysis. And so at a future meeting after FIAC has a chance to vet the idea, we're going to want to have some discussions with council about the concept of a 2-year budget cycle and how that looks, how it would work, what the advantages are, what the disadvantages are. But suffice to say, we both feel pretty strongly that Lincoln has reached a size where it really makes a lot of sense and provides a lot more flexibility. So in a moment, Nita's going to step you through some detail on the general fund, but I just want to put one bug in everyone's ear before we get started, which is we're going to spend a little more time than we have in years past analyzing and explaining how the reserves look, how they operate, what we can do away with that doesn't make sense to have in our policy any longer. And we've actually gone back and done a little bit of research about why reserve levels have traditionally been a little higher than the 25% adopted rate, as well as what's going on with his unrestricted dollar figure. But we can get into that when she gets to it. And that's all I have. Nita.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the budget workshop. As Sean said, he took all of my opening statements.
Of course you did. That's what I do.
We work really well together. So we're going to step right into the first slide. and talk about, as Sean said, the general fund, which is the, as you know, the primary operating fund for the city. And in this fund, in this fund, you'll notice that it is funded primarily through property taxes, our largest revenue source. We are predicting a 5% increase in property taxes. You know, I want to call a little attention to the elephant out there in the economy. Many economists are starting to predict a downward turn in the economy and possibly even a mild recession. But it's important to note that changes in the economy have different impacts on different revenue sources. For example, property taxes. Property taxes aren't immediately impacted by changes in the economy. In fact, it could be anywhere between 12 months to 2 years before we see a shift in the property taxes. And if the economy only has a mild correction as opposed to a more significant dip or even a mild recession, you may not see that effect on property taxes hardly at all, if at all. So we are continuing our positive trend with property tax predictions of 5% for this year. Sales tax it can be more immediately impacted by changes in the economy, but even with that, we're looking at a small growth in sales taxes as well. Let's see here. The only other thing I'd note on this graph is that our intergovernmental revenues for the 2 years ago, 2021, included the $600,000 of COVID relief funds. But other than that, right now the ARPA funds and standard allowance funds are not included in this graph or in this information. So this graph, our general uses by department for the general fund includes each of our significant departments. As you can see, police and fire, as with many general service or full service agencies, continues to be our largest uses of general fund monies in order to fund those. You might notice that in the police that we had an uptick or an increase in police expenditures. That has a lot to do with the MOU that includes retro and incentive pays. In all told, there's about $1 million in increases in S&B costs for police. So that's over 30 personnel. So when you divide that $1 million over 30 personnel, it's not as big of a pain point. The other thing you might be asking is where are the 9 firefighters that we just approved? And just a reminder that those are included in the standard allowance, not shown in this graph. But just for your information, about $800,000 for next fiscal year. So Sean mentioned earlier that we're going to talk a little bit about reserves, and we wanted to provide just a quick overview of our general fund. So it's important, do you have a laser pointer? No. It's important to note that the top line there with it says general fund has an ending balance of 7.7 million. So that is amount that is completely separate from your general fund reserves. That's the money that's in the bank, the money that we're using to fund our day-to-day activities. And I will say that it shows that this city is a bit cash rich when it comes to the general fund. We have $7.7 million in usable monies, as well as $6 million in operating reserves and another $500,000 in designated reserves. So back in 2021, at a council workshop, the city manager brought forward an item for council to consider revising the reserve policy. At that time, the city manager had suggested actually increasing the general fund reserves up to 28%. And even though that policy was not adopted or brought forward to council, the city took on an unofficial practice of making their reserves at 28%. For this year, we're going to go back to the actual policy, which right now says 25%. The 6 million that you see up there is just slightly below the 25%. And that has a lot to do with the fact that getting to that 25% is a bit of a moving target until we get closer to the final budget adoption. So it's right now the policy says 25% of the operating expenses. So that's us taking the $26 million you see up there, 26.5, and we back out the one-time expenses, the capital projects, to come up with the operating expenses, which are around $24 million. 25% of that is $6.1 million, and as you can see, we're just about 100,000-ish shy of reaching that 25%.
You said 26 million in operation costs?
So right now, the total outflows in the general fund is $26,580,000.
But that's not all
But that's not
operational.
operational. So that includes
Because the operational number was 20.
24-ish. Yeah. So
The revenue number is at 24.
the operational outflow expenses are also 24 million. So,
Okay.
which leads me into my next comment. You'll notice total outflows of 26.5 is higher than the inflows of 24.4. Now, this can cause some alarm amongst council and amongst the public. We're spending more than we're bringing in. But there's some caveats there. And one of those caveats is that about $1 million of that is one-time expenditures or the capital requests that we're going to be reviewing later on in this presentation that are coming directly out of the general fund. And of the $1 million in capital expenses, about half of that is one particular request that is very expensive for the fire department, but a needed expense. Sketch chief.
What did that cost you?
This slide wasn't in our package.
This slide is
No,
not
we
in our
added
packet.
this.
We added
We
this.
added this late because
We
I
added
wanted to
this
make
late,
sure that you saw
Okay,
it.
well,
And we'll make sure it's available for everybody, but
kind
to
of
have the,
answered
re-
some of the questions that I had.
yeah, to have a real conversation about reserves, like we spend a lot of time internally reviewing this particular sheet, like with Ruth Ann and Nita come over and we work on it. We spend almost all of our time making changes and then it links back to this, which really shows where we're at. But the other thing that Nita didn't mention that I think is really important is your beginning balance unaudited July 1, that 9.93 million. That essentially acts as your unrestricted reserve in a way.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, and we'll do whatever council wants, it's not an appropriate long-term financial practice to hold more than your operating reserve in an unrestricted reserve for a really long period of time. That meaning that money isn't working for you in some way. You're not investing it in staff or services. It's just sort of sitting there. And sure, we earn some interest on it, although not as much as we'd like. So, so when you're considering projects in the future, it's that are general fund related, it's sort of an appropriate source.
And that, that's an interesting point. A lot of agencies after the Great Recession ended in 2008, during that time, agencies tightened their belts, they cut staff, they stopped purchasing assets, they deferred maintenance on infrastructure, rehabbing buildings and et cetera. And everybody got used to doing more with less. But even after the economy recovered, agencies continued that vein of doing more with less to eventually some agencies, and I'll say the city in some departments, are trying to do something with practically nothing. So that's another reason that we see some of this, what you would consider deficit spending, where our expenses are outpacing our revenues. We have for so long been doing little with less, or trying to accomplish something with nothing, that we now need to spend funds to try to catch up, to bring our service back to a level that is commensurate with the size of our community, with the services that our community desires, and also with being fiscally responsible stewards of our community's dollars, where it doesn't look like we're holding a lot of funds as opposed to using that money wisely and effectively. And the other thing, I think Sean mentioned this at the very beginning, is that, we will be bringing before you at the last meeting in June, a budget, our full budget. This is just a portion of it. It's your big portion, your CIP, your position requests, and kind of an overview of our enterprise. We'll be bringing the full budget at the end of June, but that's not your last bite of the apple. It's really just your first bite. We come back in September for a final budget adoption, and then we come again at the mid-year, which the city performs in February. And I think that kind of leads us into our discussion with FIAC and eventually with the council about a 2-year budget cycle. Right now, we're spending all of our time budgeting. The budget cycle is a nonstop, year-long cycle for my budget team here of one. It's a good thing Ruth Ann likes to work a lot of hours and work from home, or not. But we're looking for ways not just to be effective with our staff time, but be effective with our resources and the way that we present information to council. The budget just doesn't affect Ruth Ann's time. It's a group project. Every single department in the city participates in the preparation, tracking their budget expenditures, requesting budget augmentations. And so it becomes a year-long process for them, which impacts their ability to do their job. So it's not just always the finance folks. It's really affecting chief's time and affecting engineering's time on how much time they're dedicating every single year to an annual budget process as opposed to a 2-year budget process. Questions before I leave this slide?
Yeah, on the 2-year budget process, how much time does that actually take away from staff? Because you'd still have to be tracking all of it. It's not like you just look at it once every 2 years.
Right. No.
The actual reality of
a 2-year budget
efficiencies
actually allows you to track the budget. Where right now, what we're
always
doing
planning.
is going from budget prep to budget prep to budget prep. And there really is a lot of time for us to perform a deep dive analytical look at the budget. It becomes more challenging for us to keep up on economic and budget trends, where if we had a 2-year budget cycle, we would have a 12-month period to a longer 18-month period where we could actually doing the analysis at mid-year, an analysis the following June, an analysis at mid-year after that, and then we do budget prep.
So it's not that it takes the work away, it just makes it more effective.
It's a more quality product than what you're getting now.
And additionally, I understand the new system, there's a lot of manual calculation that you have to do, right, Renina? And the new system, when it comes to tracking the budget as well as building the budget.
It'll provide more resources for us, more reports for us. But the way that the city prepares its budget book right now, there'll be some savings, but even with the new software, it's not going to build the budget book for us. The budget book that we present, that we produce, it won't build that book. The only way to build that book is through a third-party software like OpenGov or ClearGov.
Well, and the other component to the 2-year that I really like is, if you think about it, if you do a year-to-year budget, really what you're doing is you're making your estimates, you're booking that. You may come back at mid-year and make a couple little adjustments, but really it's too late by that point. February, you're so close to the new year, you're forming the new one. 2-year really gives you the ability at quarterly intervals or whatever you decide to make changes to navigate sort of what's actually happening in real time.
So in the 3.5 years I've been on council, we've had this discussion every budget workshop. So why can't we do it?
We can do it.
We can do
Why
it.
haven't we done it?
I don't know.
My guess is going to be.
Because I
that
feel like
there
we've
was-
had this same exact conversation.
I've had it
like
for
it's
14 years.
Real deja vu.
I've had it for 14 years. The good news is we've got a team in place that not only is willing, but wants to do
And I
it.
think the good news for you is that you've had a council in place that's already like, yes.
That's what I like about this
Maybe we'll
council.
stop doing the hard sell then, is that okay?
Please reference notes from before and just do it.
Bill, you had questions?
Yeah, wastewater and refuse are showing deficits for next year. Why?
That's a very good question. And if you wouldn't mind waiting till we got to these slides, is that all right?
Fine.
Okay. But I will answer it, I promise.
And
Have it in my
water as
notes.
well, by the way.
No, water is okay. Oh, no, you're right. Water is a deficit too.
Yeah, water is in a deficit. All three of our four enterprise funds are in a deficit.
The surprise is right there.
So what I would say about the airport is it's easy to look at this snapshot and say, hey, airport, thumbs up. But what I would tell you about the airport is really that it's under revenued. That we have cut the airport down to the bare bones. You know, that this isn't new news. You know, Sean did a presentation to council in April about the airport, that it's not been effectively or well managed. And
Really?
that was nice. I like that. And so as a result, we're not bringing the revenues into the airport. And so in order to keep the airport from going into a deficit spending, we have just cut it down to nothing. So this picture is really through rose-colored lenses where it looks okay, but it's not. It could be so much better than it is. Where it should be like this, but it should be higher up. Those lines should be higher up. Okay, on to our three enterprise funds that are all three in deficit spending. So the water fund, and this really holds true for all three of them, but there's slight differences. I'll say the significant increases in the expenses for water, water purchases are our largest cost. The significant increase has to do with the rates for PCWA. They raised their rates this year. They are also talking a possible 10% rate increase in 2023. And with their rates continuing to increase 8%, 7%, 7%, and 6% in the following years. Our rates have not kept pace. Our own, the city's own, I'll say, lack of a track record of continual rate studies and CPI adjustments to current rates have really put us in a position where each of these funds is now in a deficit spending situation. The way to correct that is to complete our rate studies this year. We have some that are currently in progress and others that are on track for this year. And when those rates come in, some of them are going to appear very painful, but without adopting new rates, eventually the piggy bank that exists for these three enterprise funds is going to run out.
Questions?
The answer is we haven't raised rates since 2013.
Yes, that's correct.
That's on all the funds except water, and we haven't raised water since 2018. And when the rates were done, even in those times, they weren't done with proper attention to inflation rates and maintenance needs.
Right, and without
And there has never been the desire on the city council to raise rates. It's been a major fight for them to do it every 8 years, and it should be done at the minimum every 5 years, with 5 years and followed. But it's a hard problem when you're sitting in this seat to tell people. I think that's one of my constituents talking about water rates stuff. When you are better off biting the bullet a little bit of lead at a time, rather than eating the whole thing like we're gonna have to do.
Well, I think so. Oh, I'm sorry, did I interrupt you?
No, I mean, this year I haven't seen all the rate studies aren't done yet, but I know what's happening in all three. And those rates are gonna go up in every one of them significant.
What I was going to say is I think that this, though, your comment links back to comments that I know Sean and I have had about, I think, being better and more targeted in our public outreach and public engagement and education, because we're the water retailer, right? The water wholesaler is PCWA. They're not the only ones in the state who are increasing their rates. It's a statewide problem. A lot of it is due to state mandates. Infrastructure is expensive. Those are costs that are real. They're having to raise their rates for real costs. We're going to have to raise our rates for real costs. It's like a discussion of having to educate the, because it's not, I don't want to have to do it, but we have to do it. And then the discussion is, if we absorbed it and now everyone's mad we don't have police officers and we don't have fire, the only way to subsidize anything like that is through funds that fund those essential services that everyone wants. I think it's just incumbent on us to be a little more transparent. I know we think we're transparent here, but like, there's like 3 people here, right? In terms of like really making sure that the impacted public has an opportunity when we come to that point to understand why.
Don't worry, as soon as you say rate increases, the room will be full.
It needs to be, because it's a discussion that we're going to have.
I just got out of, I apologize for being late. I was double booked with the PFE update that we're looking to adopt in a couple of weeks. And I mean, one thing that we'll bring forward is like the sewer rates. It's a drastic increase, but it's less than what it would have been had we adopted the CPI over the past 9 years.
Right.
I mean, it's a big bite that we need to take, but it's less in aggregate than had we just kept up with inflation. And I know that's hard that's the answer you guys get to give, but.
Yeah, I think it comes down to education.
Yeah.
It does, but so a little bit of additional background. The council during the recession, when property values were plummeting, when people were losing their homes, decided that was not the time to be raising those rates.
Definitely.
And if you had the money to do it, that's probably the right choice.
Right.
Yeah.
But then there came a time when we needed
No
to
longer
jump
have the
back
money.
in.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, we couldn't get 3 votes to move in that direction.
Yeah.
And just getting the rate studies done, I've been on the council now for 8 years, and that's been a pending item, I think, all 8 years.
It's true.
It's coming.
Yeah.
When we get the new rates.
Right, the entire time I've been on council, for sure.
Yeah, it's an undesirable time,
There's never a desirable time.
Well, I mean,
to
I
tell
don't,
people
I
we're gonna tax them.
we've been through, various utility rate increases that was one of the services, and it was just a sort of touch up to make sure you're keeping in line with costs. Like generally, that's not the end of the world. Going through 3 separate rate increases, all of which really, because, the public, most of them just want to know what's the bottom line bill, like what's the number? And all 3 of those numbers are going to have increases. But the good news in the long term is that once you correct, you can get back to a normal process of doing that.
And if we'd been doing a normal process, this would be just another little glitch in the road.
We wouldn't be in the boat that we're in now if we had.
What's the timeline on those rate studies and being able to have us vote on it and adopt that? And,
Sewer in July,
okay.
garbage shortly thereafter. Is Angela here? Oh, she's here.
Solid waste.
Sorry. Solid waste.
And wastewater.
Yeah.
Sewer garbage, if we're going to be transparent, let's be transparent.
Yeah. We're looking at probably early fall on garbage.
With solid waste, yeah.
Solid waste. And then water, we were thinking, it's a question, that one we are ready to kick off, but it's really more kind of policy direction from council of, do you want 3 separate you're going to have 2 separate 218 processes regardless, but do you want 3 separate 218 processes, or do you want us to combine the solid waste and water into one, which you can do?
Could we still get them back at the same fall deadline?
Likely.
Yeah,
Still be
probably not.
Probably effective in January.
Effective January 1 anyway.
Happy New Year.
So you could, it's just a matter of like, how do you want, from a transparency perspective, it always makes the most sense if you can bundle them together so they can see them all at one time versus, having to come down to a meeting 3 times in a row. But
Let's have
our goal, hopefully, and it's not reflected in this budget this year, but would be that the rates are adopted and effective for everything. Sewer before that, but solid waste and water by January 1 of 23.
So I'll just check in with the public real quick. Questions about cyberspace? Any questions at this point?
Have three folks on. Does anybody have a question? No hands are raised.
Seeing no hands?
I will move on then to wastewater. So wastewater, you'll notice a significant dip in the revenues in the current year, 21-22. So again, the rates are part of the story here. The other part of the story had to do with the payments received or not received from Placer County for the wastewater treatments. And as you know that there were some discussions on how those amounts due were calculated. And so as a result, Placer County had delayed payments from, I want to say, one went back to last year at least.
Yes, a year ago.
But, yeah, so one went back to last year that hadn't been received. So that caused a significant decrease in the revenues. You know, we're now at a better place with Placer County, and you will be seeing an item coming on the 14th. I mean, on the 14th in order to get paid up by Placer County. So that'll bring once that agreement is put in place, you know, right now we're not including that agreement. By the time we created the slides and created the budget pages, that agreement hadn't been completed, hadn't been finalized. And quite frankly, in order to try to include that revenue in this budget book would take about 2 days worth of people hours. So it's most likely not going to be included. But once we get the agreement in place, it won't be included in your June 30 budget, but it can be included in the September final budget.
So does that alone explain this dip?
That explains the majority of it, the rates and the monies from Placer County.
So what
So even if you got the
Revenue.
Revenue.
Yes.
Victoria?
And then the expenses, a lot of that is, hold on, I'm looking for it. An increase in the treatment expenses. Some of that is just the contract increases. They proposed a significant increase in that Scantech contract. So depending on, assuming the JPA goes through again in July, again, until it's formalized, it's hard for us to put that in the budget. The budget is a snapshot of what exists today. But once that's formalized, this picture will look completely different for September or the mid-year in February. Other questions, Bill?
No.
Anyone? Okay, I did call it refuse, see? I blame you for that.
Trash, garbage, solid waste. Stuff that goes to the market.
Right, so one thing to note here is that refuse, the expenses are a little bit erratic, we'll say. They're kind of up and down, up and down, up and down. And the big reason for that is due to a one-time transfer from solid waste operations to solid waste capital in fiscal year 2021. So that caused a big spike in those expenses in 2021. And it's not uncommon for a enterprise fund that has a larger working fund balance to move money from the operations fund to the capital funds, especially if those monies are needed for something like helping fund the MRF expansion or something else like that. Trucks, yeah, people, garbage cans. Any other questions before I move on to positions?
Yeah, how long do you expect it before we are going to see some increases in fees? Just, to cover this.
So as we were just talking about, that the rate study for solid waste should be to council in the fall. And so then those new rates would go into effect January 1 of 2023.
For refuse?
That's part of it. So sewage and solid waste are combined.
Yeah, so refuse is right now, we're completing the study for wastewater. That'll be before the council in July. The next fee on the docket is refuse, which should be before council in fall, but those rates go into effect January. And we'll also bring water probably thereafter in a different 218 process, and then those rates would again be effective in January.
The problem is they don't have the number, the major cost number, which is tipping fee, is not settled yet. So as soon as that gets done,
Correct.
then we'll be, this study's pretty close to being done. They need that number to make it valid.
Other questions?
Nope.
Okay, moving on to the department's favorites, well, that and CIP position requests. So this budget is, I'd say it's fairly heavy on position requests. And that, again, that goes back to my earlier statement of a lot of the positions not being replaced after the recession. You know, we've reached a tipping point where we're almost a 50,000 population city, and we have a planning department with what feels like 3 people in it. I know there's more people than that up there. We just added 3 or 4 positions, but prior to that, it's been understaffed. So there's a lot of positions throughout the city that we're looking for either reclassifications with the assistance of HR or new positions completely, mostly based on the needs of the community. So I don't want to belabor these too much, except to say that we can go through them, different areas. For example, in streets, we're looking at promotion reclassifications. Parks, we have 1 promotion reclassification and 2 additional staffs, 2 maintenance workers. Solid waste, we are adding a refuse truck driver. And the airport is promotion reclassification. Wastewater, we're currently scheduled to add 1 wastewater technician.
And just to add one thing, on the maintenance workers additions in parks, what I think is super important that you'll see in the budget presentation when we bring it, some of those positions are funded out of your newer CFD 2018. I can't remember which one is which, 01 or 02, whatever one is not, 1, which had almost no allocations to cost to it. And it's now starting to mature into a pretty healthy fund that can support maintenance workers that can really provide better maintenance to your regional facilities, being, et cetera.
And of course, the gas, in addition to that, this is the first year that we're going to be putting them in the 218-1 CFD, some of those expenses, but in addition, besides that, they are going to be funded through the gas tax.
Which is set to go up yet again.
Yeah, and that's important. Sean and I were just talking about the gas tax revenues that, Sean was telling me a story yesterday. Gas pumps they're capped at $100. You go to the gas pump and it's capped at $100, and so he can't fill his truck anymore with one time around at $100. And so it all has an effect on our pocketbooks. I drive an hour every day, one way to commute here, and fortunately, I have a relatively gas efficient car, but I'm still filling up about 1.5 times a week. Has effect to us personally, but it also has effect to us from a business perspective, where the current gas prices and the increase in gas tax is going to benefit the city overall. So I can't really complain about having to go to the gas pump when I know that it helps fund the resources and the projects and the programs that the city needs.
Oh, I still complain.
I know.
Don't feel bad.
I feel slightly better in a few slides. We see there's quite a few streets projects this year that come from that.
Yeah, so we'll talk about this.
A lot of money.
Other position
Right.
requests.
I got 3 kids. I drive all the time.
Development, we have 1 additional promotion and reclassification. Again, this doesn't include the positions that the council recently approved for a new permit tech, associate planner, engineer, and building inspectors. And then IT, we have promotion reclassification and one additional new staff of a GIS analyst.
Well, I for one am pleased to see this and the list you went through as well. We have 4 years been told we can't do it because we're understaffed. And my response, I think, is the response of the entire council has been, if you have the funds, get out and hire people.
I actually think
Fill
we
those
said try to
positions.
find the
Yes.
funds.
Yeah.
So we
Even
can
that.
get out and hire people.
Even that.
We do have the funds. We are challenged with recruitments. Every industry right now is challenged with recruitments. We saw during COVID, but some had turned a great resignation where people were just leaving the workforces. And it wasn't just leaving the workforce in order to through some other means, for example, a stimulus payment. But we've also experienced that people aren't coming back to the workforce in the ways that we had thought. And my personal opinion is that we're seeing a rise in the number of entrepreneurs, that, people not going back to their office jobs or their going back to their salon jobs or their blue collar jobs, their white collar jobs, that instead of doing that, people are out there doing their own thing, creating their own business, which benefits our economy, but it also makes it really challenging for the service industry to provide service and for all industries, including governmental industries, to recruit and hire people.
Well, if you look at new business stats, just wait 2 years, they'll be back.
I was going to say 5, but yes.
Yeah,
Oh, it's a ray of sunshine.
There are not a lot of real entrepreneurs.
No, I was surprised I was one of the evaluators for the council's $1 million business grant, and
Thank you, by the way.
I was surprised at the number of businesses that opened up during the COVID period. And I'm not like completely risk averse, but for somebody like me, I'm just like, I would never do that. I would never open a business up in such an unknown economic time. But that's just me. I'm kind of scared that way.
Thank God.
Which is why she's a finance director.
That's why I'm a finance director.
Any other questions from council at this point? Nope.
Now, I'll remind you that the 9 firefighters aren't in here because they were previously approved, and same thing with the personnel on the police force, the property and evidence tech, the records clerk, that have been previously approved, aren't
These
they?
are new requests only, right?
Yeah, these are new requests.
And the battalion chief that was approved last year, not yet filled.
So that wouldn't be
Also
in,
still there.
yeah, but it wouldn't be in here as a request.
It's already there.
It's a position that's funded but not filled, which we have some of those. Okay, moving on to good stuff.
One more quick thing on personnel that we've kind of instituted more recently is it used to be super normal practice here to know that someone's going to retire or leave and not hire until they literally retire and leave. We've done away with that. Some positions need like many months overlap. There's one in the city clerk's office I'm thinking of, because you need that training time. Or else you just spend money on the back end trying to find a way to get these folks up to speed. So we hope you see is a little less vacancy factor moving forward, because we're all overlapping at least for a short period of time.
Although the police department has done a really good job of essentially pre-hiring. That's the one department. That's it.
We just don't allow anybody to leave finance. That's how we handle it. Okay. So we have a lot of projects in this budget. I think that's pretty common for the city to see a lot of projects. Still, there's quite a few. So these aren't in necessarily a fund order. I tried to arrange by department that they're occurring in. We have about $2 million in parks projects. I do have additional detail. The first The first two, the McBean Stadium bleacher and the Park Bandstand, those are both going to be funded, proposed to be funded through the general fund. And we don't have any other general funded projects until a few other slides hence. But the rest of these on this slide are funded either by the Parks and Recs or the PFE Parks funds, and one by the LLD.
When we get the budget package, I would like a sheet on each project
Oh, yes.
Fees.
Yeah, we have them.
with a really good description and the rationale for it.
Yeah, and that's, I want to say that's the standard practice for this city is to provide those sheets. I saw that you didn't like their descriptions
Yeah.
previously.
Uh,
I think that's why he said a really good description.
No,
We've drilled
can't
down.
guarantee they're really good descriptions.
Yeah.
But we will, Travis, we'll reach out to Travis and talk about some of these projects and get better descriptions.
This year, I will say, because they give those to us first to sort of go through and parse through the ones we think we can make work and not work. Overall, they're pretty good. And where they weren't, we had follow-up conversations about what's up here, why. Like, for example, I don't know what a bandstand electrical is. I have no idea what that means. So explain what that means and why we need it and why it's better.
Because the
Tell
bandstand
him that
was
you know
never
what it is
finished.
now, because
Right.
Paul will tell you.
The answer is the bandstand was never finished. It was supposed to be wired from.
I was going to say, I can answer that question.
Oh, okay. Well, it sounds cool though.
And you
The
never,
rotary just never came through on there.
It's all our fault.
and you never tried to do an event at the bandstand, which meant you had to get a generator. So,
Right.
Yeah, that's
Kind of
correct.
defeats the purpose of a
Yeah, so
bandstand.
it's really just a stand.
It really does, though.
It's a stand.
It's just it's just a stage. It's not really a band.
Yeah.
It's a stage. But if you do have questions about any of these projects at this time, we're happy to make up answers.
You fit in really well here.
Okay. So streets has some of the, I'm going to say, one of the largest requests at 5.5 million across multiple funds. The parking lot slurry seal and stripe rehab, that's at various facilities and parks. So for example, not listed in the slide, but in my notes, there's parking lots at 4th Street, H Street, F Street, and 6th Street. Also the Arts Building parking lot, the 12 Bridges Library, the Civic Center, and the McBean Park, Pete Singer Park, Wilson Park, 12 Bridges Park. I think that's all of them, for a total of $321,000. A lot of parks for not a lot of money. The road sealant project is 9.3 lane miles at various areas throughout the city. And in our budget book, I'm going to say there's a map that shows where those areas are.
And Travis, was that project designed based on PCI conditions?
Just consistent with our PMP, the most cost-effective way to maintain our roadway.
For about $850,000 funded through TDA. INJ Street Rehab, that's $1.9 million funded through gas tax and primarily through TDA. The bicycle infrastructure funded through mostly TDA and some local transportation funds, which is a match grant that I believe the council is familiar with.
So this will be what? What's the project?
So part of it is 7th Street between O and L Street and Nicholas Road, east of Joyner Parkway between I and S Street. We're now looking at Travis. Travis, what else can you tell us about this one?
I would say that a majority of these projects are programmatically tied to other utility replacement projects. So when we look at INJ Street, that's following a water rehab project. When we're looking at the bike infrastructure or the Joyner Parkway, that's following reclaimed lines. We obviously try to time these projects in a way that we follow our underground infrastructure construction. So most of these are tailing other projects that we'll see in the water and utility side.
So the bike infrastructure is not adding additional lanes,
It's not a widening, it's a rehabilitation, safety,
painting.
green MMA.
Oh, you are going to do that, okay.
Are we still using that, what we call PCI model?
Yeah, so the PCI is the output of the PMP, the Pavement Management Program. So we still do, it's all required for our SB1 funds. We do it through MT, yeah.
Anything that uses tax funds, gas tax fund, were justified because of PMI and the combination.
Correct,
Because we don't have more.
Yeah, so the PMP is just a planning tool that's going to tell us the most cost-effective way. It's hardly ever the worst first, but it'll tell us the most cost-effective way to maintain our street infrastructure. We obviously need to marry that up. We don't want to do a streets project the year before we do the water line project. So there is a little bit of windage that we put on these projects as far as sequences, but it's generally based on the output of the PMP.
Okay, public buildings, $1.6 million in public building projects. So you'll notice these on the left side for the police, and those are funded through the PFE for the police department, including relocation of the IT room, that AC upgrade for the server room, and converting the room into converting a room to create a break room for dispatch, and the expansion of the parking lot, all through PFE Police.
Was this the impact funds for this, the PFE? Is this old funds or is this being funded by current project? And did we just not get around to it before? Or?
No, I think, so they had used PFE to my knowledge on your big expansion that just completed, right? And I think these were projects that were sort of left over that I think from what I recall is that PFE couldn't handle all of them, or it was going to be too disruptive to the department to do all of them. And then
I think these have been on the table for some time, just never picked up as a CIP.
And the IT room one is a little bit newer because it's just a new need. The amount of technical infrastructure they need is a lot more than it was a long time ago.
I think I'd say that they're old funds. The PFE, we're predicting PFE fund balance at June 30, 2022 to be 1.5 million. And these total projects are, don't make me do bad math.
1.6.
465.
Yeah, 465 for these specific projects. So I would say this is old revenue.
I mean, I'm a little bit sensitive about that. My constituents are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that we're right now we have scheduled revenues for the 22-23 budget of about $1 million into the PFE police. Center improvements that's coming out of the Prop 68 grant. Both the council chambers and the City Hall exterior paint is coming out of PFE admin. So that council chamber rehab, that's just the start of that project, which would be architectural services for the renovation and remodel, which would allow us to get a better idea of the total cost of the project.
But I think it's safe to say it's going to be very expensive.
It's going to be really expensive.
But one of the values we think in having it, because I know that it's been some preliminary design was done at one time. One of the values of doing it, well, we have to do it now, but the value is that similar to some of the park projects, like Aitken Park is a good example. We can do kind of deductive options. So the Taj Mahal versus something very Spartan.
More conservative? You're going with Spartan.
I think Spartan sounds cool.
Okay. So let's see, the McBean projects, again, part of that, part of the total $1,000,006, those are going to be funded through supplemental fees and the facilities and maintenance replacement fund and the capital improvements fund.
What's being proposed for the pavilion?
The pavilion is new flooring, new kitchen cabinets, and paint in the kitchen.
So you're going to take that pink stained linoleum out of the men's room?
Yeah, I think that is part of it. Yeah.
Flooring throughout, but don't quote me on that right now.
No, that's correct.
It was brand new flooring and not a week into it, it got stained.
It's always the way.
Part of this could be funded out of CFD1,
It could be. It could be funded out of CFD
where
one.
it's a regional.
So we do have a question on Zoom.
Okay.
Eric, please go ahead.
Who is this?
Eric?
This is Eric.
Yes, go ahead. You had a
Thank you,
question?
Gwen. Yes, first off, it was alluded or implied that there's more detail on these various projects that's available through some sheet or sheets. Where is that available? Is that out on the web or?
Yeah. Hi, Mr. Curlin. This is Sean. That will be available in the city council packet on the 28th, which will have the full budget in there along with all of the project sheets for each individual capital improvement project.
Okay, so like you mentioned, because I see a number of parks like Atkin, Brentford Circle, Bella Breeze, the park at Jimenez, none of that is mentioned here. But yet I'm assuming that that's in the budget under some fund. I just didn't know how that tied to the list of CIP projects.
Yeah, that's a good point. So some of those projects are what we call multi-budget generational, meaning they span multiple fiscal years, sort of depending on design and then execution. So typically what we do is when one of the things that NETA has tried to institute this year is only putting into the budget those projects that we're almost 100% sure we can complete during the 12-month fiscal year. And where we have those individual like park projects that sometimes take some time to design and then construct, or other really large infrastructure projects, that those go under separate cover to the city council for individual consideration.
So how does then somebody get a feel for all of that? So I think at the April meeting, I brought this up around parks, Sean, which was, I want to be able to look at a budget for the year and say, okay, this is on the radar screen, it's going to be built, or it's not on the radar screen. And there's no way for me to really understand that from looking at the budgets because that's not apparent. I've seen a lot in past budgets that haven't happened and some have happened. So it's just confusing because you can't really know from an outsider's view what's expected to happen or not, at least in terms of the information that's shared.
I think that's fair enough. So one of the things we've discussed internally is having, it's fine to have it in a budget, but as we know, things happen during the year, whether it be capacity for us to pull off a project. Sometimes, Travis and his team will take something to bid and it'll just be way too expensive and outside of the budget. So we decide to hold it for strategic reasons to hopefully get better pricing later. So one of the things we've discussed internally is on the park side, at least, because we know that's a sensitive point for the community, is sort of creating a splash page on our website or under our capital projects site, which is sort of built now, but we have a bit to add to it that gives more specific data about when those are built, where they're at in the process, a little percentage ticker that shows how things are going so that people can check in with it periodically. Because, to be honest with you, scouring through a very lengthy budget might not be super helpful versus just a direct source of information that's updated periodically.
No, that'd be great because I was scouring through the budget to try to understand, and I couldn't understand it because there wasn't enough detail,
Yep.
provided. But it sounds like there's going to be more detail for the 28th that would be available, or?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Can I ask just one question, just because I'm curious, because I saw it and you'd asked about it. There's the Moore Road Trail. I think it's $1.1 million that's in the budget. I want to say it implies 1,000 linear feet of trail or something. Could somebody just talk about that since it's such a big number?
I need to pull up the sheet.
Ed?
We're working on it, Eric. Give us a second.
Okay, no, understood.
Trying to think
Oh,
where
that
it
was
was.
It's right there.
Oh, sorry.
Top on.
Moore
Moore
Road,
Road, class one.
class.
Oh, I see, there.
1,000 linear feet
Yeah.
trail.
Let me see if I
I'm
can.
going to guess that's regional funds.
That would make sense.
Let's see here.
It's budgeted in the park PFE.
Yeah, it's budgeted in Park PFE at this time. So Eric, are you looking for where it's going to be?
I'm just like, where and what? I mean, I see 1.1 million and I see a trail and I see a bulldozer, plow a path. And it seemed like such a big number for 300 yards of trail that I was just intrigued on what it actually was.
Online, we do have the CIP map, which shows locations and descriptions of the project. So
Okay,
Yeah, Eric, after the meeting, I'll find it and shoot you a link.
that'd be great.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
No other.
Copy me on that. I'm curious.
Yeah, I'll send it to everybody.
It's on the regular project map?
yeah, if you go through the engineering CIP, it shows all the locations of the upcoming projects.
Okay. That was it, Eric?
That-
He's gone.
Sorry.
That's right. Anything else from council before we move on?
We're almost to the end.
Yep.
I promise. Like I said, it was a lot of projects. Okay, so moving on to water, 5.6 million, wastewater, 235, airport, 190, and drainage, 2.2 million. So under water, we have 5.6 million. That's the ongoing water distribution rehab east to replace old and deteriorated water pipelines and fire hydrants. It should be completed, this project should be completed in 22-23. And also the ongoing water distribution west to replace old and deteriorating water pipelines and fire hydrants. Again, it should be completed the project should be completed in 23-24, but a majority of the costs, assuming the majority of the work will be completed in 22-23. The airport, that is the grant-funded ongoing project for the oil and water separator and an airport FFA grant for pavement management plan update. Drainage.
Just did that.
Yeah. Drainage is the stormwater retention basin. That's the ongoing Lakeview Farms volumetric storage phase 1, 150 acre basin. So that's a multi-year project with additional costs that are going to be, that we'll see in 23-24.
And the wastewater, that SCADA is a lift station, right? That's not at the.
Correct, that's correct.
Yeah, correct.
Right.
Any other questions at all? Okay, vehicles and equipment. So here's our, the majority of our general fund projects are these projects on the left, all the way down to the pickup truck for the park supervisor. So starting at the top, our largest general fund CIP request, the Type 3 wildfire fire engine. That would replace a 1990 engine that we have currently. The cost of that is projected at $477,000. We also have 10 SCBA or self-contained breathing apparatus for fire personnel for $140,000. Police department SUV to be used by the Special Investigations Unit. 2 patrol cars, which would replace aging patrol cars. and a police SUV for the public safety chief, and that pickup truck for the park supervisor for $40,000.
Talk to us, chief.
All right, so fire engines are expensive. Very expensive. But as you were saying, we have 2 dedicated type 3 pieces of apparatus right now. One of them, they're both in service. The one that she's mentioning and replacing, the reliability is questionable. Whenever it goes out on a more advanced fire, it typically limps back home and is out of service until we get it fixed. So the intent would be to replace that. So we have 2 modern operational type 3 wildland units. That will complement the other 5 type 1s that we have in the city. They're our first out. Those are mainly designed for structure fires and being on roads, whereas the type 3 they're off-road vehicles, more ground clearance, more angle of approach. This has been a item that has been asked for many years. Not sure how often it's floated to this level, but a lot of the conversation was, well, we're not going to buy a $500,000 of equipment to send out of county. Well, our focus is the city. So, not saying a vehicle like that would never go out of county, but certainly the priority would be to keep it in the city and to take care of the home front. So, they're just a very expensive piece of equipment, but the one we have now is 20 years old, so they stick around for a while. And for the price, you're looking at about 31 grand a year is what it would cost us for the life of that if you divide up that 477,000. So, and prices also are going up. So, it'd be one of those things that we place the order and we'd see the piece of equipment in a year to a year and a half, and get it in service. The SCBAs, those are right now we have a bit of a mixed bag of breathing apparatuses, and this would allow us to get everything on one platform, have all of the certifications done correctly, and just have everything be the same. And some of the police asks, we just purchased a lot of vehicles, but it was extremely late in the budget year. So it's a bit of a shuffling. So even though it says an SUV for me, well, I do have an SUV, but we kind of picked from patrol to make that happen because one of our unmarked vehicles got in a collision. Someone ran a red light and hit our car. So we were kind of forced to make some moves. So the 4 vehicles for the police department be for detectives, and then probably 3, definitely the 2 patrol vehicles, and then the one that's dedicated for me is likely to patrol. So, but the fleet is aging, and the Fords that we bought 5-6 years ago are becoming into life, and we have a couple cars, 160,000 miles on them. So the fleet's limping, and the inventory is low and really hard to find. So again, this probably wouldn't be anything that we'd see a car for a year.
Just there, you probably can't even kill them.
So I would let council know that our last few vehicle purchases, we weren't able to purchase on the government contracts. Vendors just aren't selling on government contracts because honestly, why would they? Why would they sell to us at a lower price when they can sell vehicles at a premium? So we're having to pay regular retail for vehicles in addition to having difficulty finding them. Another option for council funding some of these vehicle purchases. So for example, the fire engine or any of the police vehicles could be funded out of this capital replacement, which is we have been contributing $300,000 to each year, and we'll have an ending fund balance of $992,000. If it feels unpalatable to have $1 million come out of the general fund, maybe it's more palatable to only have $500,000 or so come out of the general fund and maybe fund the Type 3 fire engine out of that capital replacement line.
Are there any, since you said it's 20 years old, did you guys check to see if there's any rebates or incentive programs available for improved air quality from purchasing a new engine?
I haven't looked into that.
Yeah.
Like Carl Moyer program is one of them that can do that sometimes.
Yeah, check with Carl.
And there's like extra money in the budget this year for air, so
Okay.
they sometimes focus those funds regionally on like the most impacted regions, which might take us out of it, but it's worth checking with Eric.
Okay.
Good thought.
We definitely need it. We're not getting any less at risk for fires.
Bill, anything?
Okay, so moving on, we have two pickup trucks for parks coming out of Development Services, and then vehicles for streets out of TDA, two utility trucks, a dump truck to replace a 1996 truck, and a 3-axle trailer to replace a 2002 trailer. So as Chief says, not just the police fleet is aging, a lot of our fleet vehicles are aging, and I expect that we'll continue to see numerous vehicle requests in the next few years. Since we have 2 pages of them.
So we jumped past the pickup truck and the backhoe for water.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so apologies. My page is different than yours because I have notes on mine. So the water, we have a pickup truck for staff and a backhoe to replace a backhoe that was surplus. So we're down one piece of equipment and just looking to fill that void with this backhoe purchase.
Okay.
Apologies. All right. On to solid waste. 2 new garbage trucks, with the continued development within the city, routes are expanding and additional vehicles are needed to meet that need, as well as a roll-off truck. For those of you who don't know what a roll-off truck is, so you'll see a pickup truck running around with a big steel garbage bin on the back that can be loaded and offloaded. That's what's a roll-off truck. Work for a garbage company. I can tell you about garbage and a MRF.
Refuse.
Yeah, garbage.
Solid waste, I thought. It was.
Not if you work for a garbage company, it's not.
Either it's the dump.
Wastewater. There's a difference between a dump and a MRF.
I know.
Okay, so wastewater would be funded out of 721 wastewater capital replacement. So we have the trailer mounted sewer bypass pump, SCADA equipment and control upgrades for lift stations for about $335,000, a utility truck for $65,000, Vector truck and equipment to replace aging equipment. That's the highest cost there for $600,000, and a Bobcat for the wastewater treatment plant to replace an 18-year-old Bobcat for $115,000.
And real quick on the Vector truck, those are always the most expensive ones, but also the most critically important. The one we have is quite old. And in fact, the state, these new, diesel requirements are starting to, you can't run them in many cases. So you'll probably see lots of larger equipment that have been really great for us for many years, but for a variety of air reasons, we can't use them anymore.
And are all of these investments in infrastructure and equipment going to be rolled into our discussions with moving forward with COJA and city investment, and how does that play out?
Yeah, and in this particular instance, almost all of these, I think all of these are collection related.
Okay.
Not treatment related, but to answer your question, yes.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of capital assets that will be transferred.
And as we're moving forward through budgeting, we're paying attention to the separation and how we're moving forward on one side. Okay.
And there's the Vector truck. The technology increases.
Yeah.
Are phenomenal. And 600K is about right.
It's going to provide quite a bit of safety. I mean, right now the guys are out there. We've got a Vector truck that they need to clamp on, suction hoses, stuff like that.
Oh, really?
This would be one that can extend on its own, and it's quite a bit more automated than our current equipment allows for.
Have you seen the demo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Keeps the guys out of the holes.
Yep. And just real quick on COJA, or this new JPA, one of the things we were actually just talking about today is this idea that there may be infrastructure that the JPA receives in title that we may need for some reason at some point for some sort of emergency event. So making sure that we have kind of worked out a mutual aid kind of deal just in case we need equipment or help on certain things. Important.
Okay, last slide. IT 1.5, or I'm sorry, 1.7, and that includes the citywide financial software that we are beginning implementation on. In fact, we'll have a kickoff meeting next week for $500,000. There's also security camera project for City Hall and the library that's funded out of PFE admin and PFE library for $70,000. Routing software for solid waste.
Yeah, can you just pause on that for 1 second, Nita? Sure. This one's really important. We do our routes like super old school currently. And the reason that's a problem is that it's fine when your city's small. Now we're building all of these new subdivisions and new roads and new routes that need to be created. And so we know this because Jen Brown set up something similar for water shutoffs. But really having a sophisticated mapping software is super helpful, but it's primarily helpful operationally because a couple people call it sick on a Friday, let's say, and their routes are going to have to be assigned to somebody else. Well, maybe they've never driven that route before, and this literally will create the most efficient path to make sure that everybody's picked up. Because as Angela and I were talking about, people call right away if their trash doesn't get dumped at that time.
It's an expensive software at $225,000, but critically needed for our expanding community. And then, let's see, we have the work order system. So that's going to benefit solid waste, wastewater, and water operations. So funded out of several funds at a cost of $120,000. And we're anticipating that that's going to provide some efficiencies and savings of time for the analysts in each of those different divisions.
But also it will allow for online ticket submittal to where, depending on the type of complaint, it could literally go straight into the field. You know, hey, there's a pothole on this street and maybe there's a person really close and it can route it to them.
Yeah, I want to say, didn't somebody tell me there was an app that community members will be able to load on their phone to report incidences or occurrences or things that need attention?
Awesome.
There is right now as well. It's called Facebook.
This would be an app that goes straight to the person who's supposed to get the
I
information.
believe Folsom uses one that they really like.
Yeah. And the way it works is it will be branded, to Lincoln. So, and I think most of them even allow like pictures and things so that you can upload, and
I've seen Folsom. It's cool.
a lot more responsive. And we'll still take phone calls and stuff, but some people don't want to do that.
So Jen is on Zoom if anybody has any questions. Jen Brown is on.
My only question that isn't like necessary, it's peripheral, is there anything that's like on our radar that should be on our radar that's in the budget about like cybersecurity threats, bolstering up everything? Is that what this architecture security means?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of stuff to get in front of that as much as we can. And the network architecture security is findings in our AWEA audit, which is the water audit that was done on both the IT and the SCADA operations side. Those are things that we need to add there to each site. Okay. Most of the cybersecurity stuff is not going to be too detailed, just for cybersecurity's sake.
Right. Defeats the purpose.
Yeah. So, but yeah, there's definitely stuff going on there. I just wanted to add one thing for that work order system. It's also going to include something that we've never done, and that's preventive maintenance. So that's just maintaining the utilities and the assets that we have on a schedule to make them last longer. And we just don't have software that can handle and schedule those kinds of things. And that's another thing that this will do. It's not just a reactive work order system, which is what we have now.
Thank you.
The network architecture security, the water op thing, aren't there grants available from Homeland Security just for this type of activity? No, she's not on anymore.
I'm here. Still, yeah.
Have you looked at that?
I don't know about grants, but I can look into it.
I think I've read that there are for infrastructure, major infrastructure problems. I do want to also, seeing these kind of CIP projects in our CIP project list is a attestation to what having a innovation officer does for you.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
You know, even though we've needed these things, they never showed up. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And that is our last slide. I will say that this is one of the opportunities for council to provide direction to staff for comments, for adjustments, or frankly, deletions from the requests that have been presented this afternoon. And if not today, at the June 28th meeting, or even the final adoption in September.
I'd like to get those one-page sheets before that input gets.
Yeah. I agree with that, but you've reviewed all of this. Is there anything here that concerns you?
Everything that concerned us has been cut already. Or in some cases, like, so for example, here's the problem, like just to circle back real quick to the 1-year budget cycle. It doesn't, in my opinion, do the city any service to create a document that know to be generally an accurate worst case scenario, right? And then maybe adjusted at mid-year some, and then end up the next year. It's sort of, you build on the problem every year. And so we're, from our perspective, the kinds of things on the capital side that get put forward are either projects that have been on the books for a really long time. For example, the Moore Road Trail has been, I think I saw it in documents going back almost 10 years. Or projects that, and you'll see in the sheets, that this hasn't been addressed in X number of years and it's becoming a serious issue. And so all of those justifications will be included for you to consider. And, it's not that there's any right or wrong decision. Sometimes it's just, council doesn't feel comfortable on certain authorizations, then we come back and try to attack it another way. Or alternatively, the other thing we could do is if there's certain projects that feel worrisome from a finance perspective, we need to, and council says, we'd really like to spend a lot more time and resources hunting grant funding for that. We can do that too. And the grant discussion I have coming to you separately because there's a lot of money on the table that we've been leaving. But yeah, so we'll have all that. And we don't want you to feel, but what's really important to us is you get a really professional product when you're adopting even the preliminary budget, but not to feel like you're forced into making a decision on something really important. If you need to put it off until September, that's fine. It doesn't affect the process at all.
So we used to have a full-time grant writer. Is it time to consider recreating that position?
I think we at the minimum need to have some type of, retained consultant to do that work for us, for sure.
And overall, it would increase our odds if we do have a professional writer and if the process is, say, more centralized or supervised. Right now, anyone can submit for any type of grant that they find or that they feel might be a good opportunity. But a grant evaluation isn't always about what monies it can provide. It can also be about what's the cost of that grant, what's the match requirement, what's the time investment, what are the deliverables that are going to be needed in order to be successful in that grant. You don't want to then get a grant and not be able to expend those funds in the terms, the time limit, or the way in which the grant was provided.
And also, what's the ongoing accountability reporting to the city? Because sometimes you end up spending way more on the back end than you would have just paying for it yourself.
Right.
A lot of the professional firms.
My other concern I'll just throw out there is if we did decide to hire an in-house grant, there's a whole lot of people who do grants. There's not very many people who do them well. And you actually get money back. So we'd want to be careful.
No one, I'll say this in a really public setting, but it is there is a component to who you know. to arrive.
Skill set also, being able to tell the story and actually understand the operations of the city and like what we're trying to do and why we need it and if it matches. And I feel like that's what makes a successful grant writer is if they're like, oh, hey, I know what you think you want and that you technically meet this criteria. It's not what they're looking for. You're
Yep.
not getting selected. Pass. You're going to spend a lot of money applying for something that's not for you. But this looks like it's really great for you. Maybe you could get this grant and then backfill that one, right? It's all about kind of like,
Yeah, the classic
see it.
the classic example of my career is many years ago, a police chief got really excited about this idea for these electric motorcycles that are created for police to use, and they're really cool looking. The problem is that the range isn't great and they don't go up to the speeds that you need if you happen to get into a pursuit. So the first few times that happened, they were like, oh, these don't really work for us. And so they ended up just being used in parades until we surplus them years later. And so that's a good example of sort of, thinking something that maybe doesn't end up working out in the long term.
All right.
Sean, I was able to pull up the CIP sheet for the Moore Road Trail. I don't know if we're able, if we can answer the question right now, but I can.
Sure.
Yeah.
The project is when 65 came through at Bisect Moore. So this is going to be creating 1,000-foot long trail, which doesn't sound like much, but this is going to be going under the 65 overpass.
Okay.
And there's significant permitting because we'll be under Caltrans, adjacent to Fish and Wildlife and Army Corps. And there are walls and fences, and it's more than just a bike trail in Greenfield. This is
Hugely important project that reconnects parts.
connect Sorrento to Lincoln Crossing in a very efficient manner.
Good.
Good. Something to work on and check back on.
Thank you for doing that.
As far as the budget thing, not really the budget, but it is a budgetary item. At the presentation on the 28th, I'd also like to see the use of money of the $10 million, $11 million of ARPA.
We can barely hear you there. We can barely hear you.
Oh,
You want
I'd like to
the
see
use
that.
of our,
The use of
what are
our,
we calling it, designated?
already we've
Standard
encumbered
allowance
and so on.
Okay.
Yeah, we can provide
As an addendum or something
By the
separately.
end of the fiscal year, we won't have expended a lot of those funds,
Right.
but we can provide a preliminary report.
But we have committed quite a bit of it already.
Yeah, so we can provide a report of spent and committed for the following year, an estimate essentially. Yeah.
Richard, you had a question?
Yeah, two questions. Number one, at the beginning of the conversation, there was a slide up there on reserves. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, the very
It's
first.
not included. on the packet.
No, I apologize, Richard. We added that just yesterday because it was such an important part of the overall
Make
conversation.
that available to the public.
Of course, yep.
And then secondly,
Richard, we can't hear you at all. Can you come up here to the Zoom can't hear you?
Sure. There was two questions. Number one, just to make the public have the ability to look at the reserve slides, because I think that is very important. And then secondly, I looked at the material. There was nothing in there about the development fund. And this is a very important fund over here. Over the years, I've seen how, not just here, but in lots of other cities, how that has gotten away from control. And all of a sudden, it's a huge problem. So, and we're growing so rapidly. So if you're not going to talk about it now, sir, I hope that would come back at a later time for an in-depth.
Yeah, we will. We'll make sure that gets added in. It'll be in certainly in the overall budget sheet, but we'll touch on that fund is
Very healthy.
very, very, very healthy.
Yeah, it has about $12 million projected at 12/30/2021 and $13 million projected at 6/30/2022.
Yeah, but as we all know, the money's come in up front.
Right.
And you've got to pay for it at a later time. And that's where you get into trouble.
Definitely.
Don't have it matched.
Yeah, so that will be, but this budget workshop was just focusing on the position requests, CIPs, the enterprise funds, et cetera. But yeah, we will be presenting the full budget at our June 28th meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone on Zoom have any questions?
No hands are raised.
Then, thank you for for that very, very thorough presentation. We appreciate it. We'll move on to item 4B, discussion and direction regarding a grant program for local nonprofit agencies from the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, Final Rule Standard Allowance Revenue Loss Fund. Oh,
It's a mouthful.
it is a mouthful.
I don't have it wasn't necessary to create a PowerPoint for this. I need to just have a little bit of direction from a city council so that I can build, so that I can make sure I'm following what you want as it relates to nonprofit assistance. So checks actually for the business grant program are being cashed today. We've gotten plenty of calls and, really great feedback. The process went pretty smooth, really, overall. But that was pretty straightforward. This one is not as straightforward because there's really what I've heard from city council is two separate things. One is we'd like to find a way to fund nonprofit activities as specifically as it relates to mental health needs in our community. That's cool. And then I've also heard not only from some council members, but also from our nonprofit community, hey, it would be really great if we had some sort of program akin to what the business program did, because what the Lincoln Community Foundation would tell you, who deal with a lot of the nonprofits, is a lot of them were really struggled during COVID to do some of their normal fundraising that they do, and so are playing from behind, much like many of our businesses. And so they have asked that council consider some allocation and some type of similar process that would allow our local nonprofits to apply for some type of program. And so I've told them, well, really that's just a policy decision for council. And I've had separate conversations with specific larger nonprofits like the Lighthouse and others as it relates to targeted service delivery on the mental health side. But really what I need to know is just for council to attempt to drill down a little bit more on how you'd like to allocate some of those funds. And then I can build it and bring it back to you. I've done most of the work, no matter what way you go, or even if you go both ways. I just want to make sure I don't waste your time if one of them isn't interesting to you.
Okay.
You're looking at me because I'm going to have something to say.
Yeah, go for it.
My knee-jerk response to that is not necessarily my final response. I could probably be dissuaded otherwise, maybe. But I think that the nonprofit side is different than the business side. The business side is directly related to economic development. There's a direct benefit to our business owners, to our community, to our residents, to our pocketbook as a government. Not that I don't want to invest in all of the great, wonderful things that nonprofits do, because they really do amazing things in our community, which is why I said I could probably be dissuaded from what I'm saying right now. But I also feel like we have a one-time opportunity to use one-time funds to really drill down on priorities that are important to us as a city, like policy priorities. It's not that much money to leverage. And so I think the policy question there is, are we wanting to kind of spread it around like peanut butter on toast and make sure everyone gets a little bit of something, which is what we did with the business fund. And it felt fair because everyone should have been able to have access to assistance if they were proportionately impacted on that side. Or are we wanting to really concentrate our investment to leverage on something we want to accomplish? And they're two different outcomes that are neither of them are bad, but I think that's the policy question. I would like to see definitely see if there's anything we can do to connect what's happening with the Adopt a Creek program and see if we can't get that somehow hooked in to nonprofit to make that a permanent program. The results that have come out of that program, I don't think any of us truly saw coming, and I think they're sustainable. I think there's a there, and if we can leverage some of this money that we'll never have again to really positively put that on a trajectory to impact our community for the better in the future, I feel like that would be a really worthwhile use of those funds, to where I feel like I could tell another nonprofit board why I'm not creating an equitable fund for everyone to access, because these are priorities that we've continually stated as the city are important to us. I feel mental health falls right into that. So I think that for me, those are two big priorities I would really love to see funded. Because I think they line up with things that we talk about all the time.
I think those are great thoughts. Bill?
You have a report, Sean, you have a report on what businesses received grants and how much? Mm-hmm. Can I get that? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
No direction or thoughts on the not-for-profits and funding?
Not yet.
Fair enough, Dan?
One question. Are there any outstanding needs that we didn't fulfill on the business side? Really?
That depends. So almost everybody was funded that was in city limits. We had some applicants that were not in city limits that under separate cover, there will probably be a request to council to consider whether or not that makes sense for you to. But we're talking very minor, like 3 or 4 or 5 applicants. So 90 some odd percent, 95+% were funded. The ones that weren't funded were simply either they were already out of business and we verified that, or they pulled out for whatever reason. So pretty much everybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have I don't know how you choose the nonprofit. I do have I don't have a desire to fill revenue that people weren't able to raise. You know, that's different than business losing revenue.
Yeah, I think so
Because you
too.
got associated costs with it. And a lot of the nonprofits or the foundations, you don't have the revenue, you don't have the revenue to give out. It's not that your business suffers.
Well, but the community still can, because think of all the things that Rotary does, right? So if Rotary didn't have the opportunity to raise all the funds, and we might not have ever gotten the improvements at the horseshoe pits, which are fantastic and a benefit. You know what I mean? Like they're the things that kind of like. But I agree with you. I mean,
You know, I
I agree with what you're saying, but also I'm noting that the lack of investment into the nonprofit does have a ripple effect on our community.
Right. Yeah, but, and I agree with the 2 priorities.
I don't think I have a palate or an interest in choosing the nonprofit. I think that if we decided to go that route, that we invest in priorities, we structure a program of what we would like to see funded, and we open it up to any nonprofit who wants to submit a grant, a proposal for those grant funds.
But what you're saying though is the funds must be used towards a
Right.
specific purpose,
That we-
not just to.
That's what I'm saying. We create a, here's what we want to see happen with these funds, apply for it. And best application gets it. That's going to execute our priority. I don't want to like crown king a nonprofit locally. I don't want to be in that position at all. I want us to invest in local priorities and to leverage those funds to execute something.
Let's explore that a little bit. One of my thoughts is the city created the Community Foundation to be able to route these funds to causes, nonprofits and alike. It was never as well endowed as it should have been. This is an opportunity to correct that and to let the Community Foundation play the same role, frankly, that the chamber did on the business grants.
They're more than willing to do that. We've met 5 or 6 times about it.
Would they be willing to do it if it was only for limited purposes?
Probably. What Chris and Jan would probably tell you if they were here, and because they've told me this, is their perspective is that every nonprofit, by its very nature, provides some type of improvement or value to the community that makes the community better. That's the purpose of a nonprofit. And, so, okay, if you're a performing arts organization, well, you're bringing culture, and that's important. And there's certainly mental health aspects to that, kids services, whatever it is, food, basic services. So I think they would probably have a broad perspective, but there's absolutely no reason that if you picked your dollar amount. You said, here are the priorities that we want to focus on. You create a set of criteria. It actually might be better in one sense because that's sort of what they do, right? And we could still set up an independent panel of our folks so it's fair, right? And have them admin the program that way. I mean,
Similar to how we did it, or I like that idea. How much money did we say again? What are we talking for this?
you set aside,
We set some aside theoretically, right?
you did. You theoretically set aside $2 million total for business and nonprofits. Of that, you had originally thought that you'd probably need, I think it was 25% towards nonprofits. And at the time, we thought the business need was much greater. Turns out it's about $1 million, probably could do more, but I mean, we're at where we're at now. So you have essentially $1 million of that amount left. And I don't know that $1 million is where you need to be, but you have room.
We could potentially have a much smaller fund that goes out for that that discretionary, hey, here's a pot of funds for the community foundation to accept applicants that we feel like they've been impacted and apply for it, set it a smaller threshold and cap it at however much per organization, and then dedicate the remaining of that, split it between our priorities. And because I think even on just like the homelessness program, we could create multiple year funding to really get that up. Three, it has to be spent by 2026. Which is, I mean, enough for a program to really start to get off the ground.
I'm taking
my email today. We have a pilot program that we're hoping to launch and can have to you in relatively short order.
That would be my preference, if we could take like a small bit of it and put it to, however they'd like to, similar to what we did for the business, but much smaller amount.
Right. Use it for.
Cap it at a smaller amount also.
Okay.
Right? And then take the remaining and split it.
So let's say you took, just for the purposes of discussion, let's say you took of the total amount, we say $500,000 towards nonprofits. Of that, half, or let's say 200,000 or whatever, goes towards the micro grants for.
So I was thinking 200,000 towards micro grants, and maybe we take the full remainder of the 800,000 of million if we're going to talk homelessness and like a multiple year, like potential, get our creeks under control. I'd like to see an investment there. And then I'd like the rest to go to mental health.
Mental health, homeless assistance and services. Any other high priorities just on the large money side that we haven't touched?
Those are the two that I feel like all of us have agreed upon over the last couple of years of talking between CARES Act and ARPA funds. I think you'll get a lot of consensus from us there.
Well, they're plenty expensive, so you.
I was going to say, but I think we have an opportunity, right? Like the state has thrown so billions of dollars towards it for what? I'd really like us to try to find something that seems like it actually is working.
Okay. That is super. If the rest of the council generally.
Does that work for you, Bill?
So
that's super helpful.
Maybe yes?
now,
No, I said yes.
Oh.
Now you're going to blow it all up.
no,
Hush.
now,
Just kidding.
now, if you say we do 750 to the high needs, that's a multi-year grant program or a grant?
A grant with multi-year funding, I think. Yep. I don't think it's, I think we do it once.
Right.
It'll be easier for staff, it'll be easier for everyone, and then that way we have multi-year funding. If the program meets the metrics and benchmarks that are all happening, right, you have to do your reporting.
So for the evaluation of I'm gonna just split them between, to make it simple,
Yeah.
large and small.
Yeah.
The large programs, I'll put a few different ideas together for you to consider, but I sort of feel like because of the dollar figures you're talking, and it'll be different than the micro program, it should be, because there should be metrics
There needs to be.
and reporting. And you need to know that your council's investment is, doing what you put the money forward. So almost in that, it might make sense to have the council as a whole or a subcommittee involved. And I've tried to kind of not make that practice, but in this particular instance, it might make sense just because we're talking big dollar figures. It's not $5,000-$10,000. This is.
And I also feel like that one's a little different because it is a program that we started. That's a city program. It's been a city priority and it came from discussions in a workshop. So maybe we have a workshop of it where we talk about the potential pilot program. We talk about what we think is going to work and what those metrics should be like, right? Like it's a little different than taking someone else's outside program and saying, hey, we're going to pick you. It's like, this is something that we've really been working towards. And now we have the opportunity to potentially fund it and keep it and get it, scale it.
Would you want to limit participants on the big grant side to only Lincoln nonprofits? This is another thing that's going to come up for sure.
It would have to be limited to only providing value to Lincoln residents. I could be potentially open to a nonprofit that operates outside of Lincoln, but they're only providing services to my constituents.
Got it. Got it.
And they're going to have to be able to show that every dollar spent is spent here, not a conglomerate of here's the overall impact of you benefit because of this program. They have to be here or I'm not interested.
Okay. This is exactly what I was hoping for.
Well,
Any public input on this?
We did have a card, Gary McDonald. Can you come up to the table, Gary?
Okay.
Next to Travis. There's not a microphone.
actually interested in this?
Well, I figured I was actually here for the budget, but
There's money on the table.
yeah, why not talk? Gary McDonald, Executive Director of Lighthouse Counseling and Family Resource Center. I just had my 7-year anniversary there. So I've been dealing a lot with mental health for as many years as I've been here. And we actually don't serve a lot of homeless people simply because, and I know from experience, my stepdaughter was homeless, addicted to heroin, sex trafficked, and so the whole gambit. And certain people will forever be homeless. They cannot be helped. But the people that we help are the people that are on the margins that we know we can help. And so, and I know that ARPA particularly prioritizes mental health, especially when it comes to children. And so initially I did not understand the scope of ARPA because it was so new and I had no idea what the city was going to do with the funds, and there were no discussions. So I came in very conservatively and I asked for $65,000, $50,000 for salaries, $15,000 for giveaways, because that's what I figured we'd be allocated. But then I realized, given the discussions that we've had and the number of shootings that there's been, and it's just been amazing. So I put together, and I'm sorry I'm going to go over 3 minutes now because this is exactly 3 minutes. So according to Education Week, 2021 had 34 mass shootings at educational institutions. It's the highest number since the organization started its data. In 2022, including Uvalde, there have been 27 school shootings this year. At the current rate, we will eclipse the previous record of 34 school shootings in 1 year. In total, there have been 230 mass shootings in the year 2022, and we're still counting. There were 14 mass shootings that occurred over Memorial Day weekend. Last weekend, which is the weekend after Memorial Day, mass shootings left another dozen dead and 60 injured. A Granite Bay, and I don't know if you've heard this, a Granite Bay high school student suspected of planning a shooting on campus was arrested Tuesday, May 31st, after an anonymous tipster told authorities of an alleged plot. So it's close to home. On Thursday, June 2nd, authorities received a tip that a Berkeley High School teenager was recruiting students to join in the mass shooting and bombing plot. He was also arrested. Back to Lighthouse. In 2021, Lighthouse served 4,169 people. Clearly, we're one of the largest nonprofits in the area. 25% of the people lived in Lincoln, which equates to about 1,036 people that we served last year. We used to be at 51%, but because we opened up offices in Auburn and And Roseville during the pandemic, instead of closing, we actually got larger. We're seeing more people during the county, so our percentage is still high in Lincoln. It's still the majority, but it has dropped down to 25%, which is about 1,036 people. Of that number, 543 of those Lincoln residents were under the age of 18, which is about 52% of the people we serve. So more than half of the people we serve are children. Suicide ideation in young children continues to be on the rise and is occurring in younger age children. Last week, I'm sorry, I'm tired. It's been long hours. Last week, I met with a child psychologist that told me children as young as 6 years old are exhibiting suicidal ideation. As of today, we have 1,547 people on our counseling wait list. We estimate approximately 400 of those people live in Lincoln. In 2021, we lost 6 staff members because we were not competitive enough salary-wise. This year, for us to remain competitive in the marketplace, we need to increase our salaries by $165,000 in 1 year. Our counseling budget is about $1.5 million each year. These anticipated pay increases are currently unfunded. To hire just one licensed counselor at current pay rates plus benefits, much in part because of the mass resignation, it will cost Lighthouse over $100,000 to hire one counselor per year. In hiring one additional licensed counselor plus the pay increases we plan for staff, we're looking at more than $250,000 increase in our costs this coming year. We are the largest mental health organization in Lincoln. Our family resource centers and other nonprofits outside of Lincoln are referring their clients to us. Kids First is in Roseville and they have offices in Auburn. They refer to Lighthouse some of their counseling that they can't handle because they're overwhelmed. I'm asking for your help. Whatever ARPA dollar money you had in mind to give Lighthouse to address the mental health emergency we are facing, it will not fully address the mental health needs of Lincoln families. ARPA clearly prioritizes mental health and children, and that's who we serve. Thank you for your time and attention, and I apologize for going over 3 minutes.
Thank you for all the good work you do.
Thank you.
Anyone online?
We have 2 folks left. I don't see hands raised.
I had a thought that is somewhat tertiary. So have we had any discussions with Carrie, with the school district, what their needs are, what they're doing? We might have an opportunity to sit down with Chief, sit down with Carrie, maybe you sit down and see, like, maybe it doesn't all go to nonprofits. Maybe we take some of that mental health portion out and see what we can do to maybe, do they need additional salaries to increase counseling in schools? That's one avenue to make sure that children are able to do it. I know that when my kids were in elementary school here, they had someone on campus like once every 2 weeks. Or maybe we can have dollars available for when you attend domestic violence calls, that we're able to then fund services for the trauma of the family, because we know that when there's adverse child experiences, that they're better served when they have that wraparound family unit and the full services. Maybe we can do something and we can ask Gary how we structure. I mean, we have an opportunity to really think outside the box. And if we haven't talked to our local partners, maybe we want to before we decide what we're going to do.
Yeah, so
It could also be a bad idea, but.
No, I don't think it's a bad idea. I will say this. I don't know the specifics of Western Placer's ARPA, but I can tell you the school district's got a fortune of money out of ARPA, and I don't.
Can we leverage it though, right? Like, what are their needs?
Yeah, maybe. And maybe they haven't allocated funds towards those specific purposes. So we'll seek that out. I guess the other component is maybe what we could do is write the request for proposals in such a way where we're incentivizing creative ideas that focus on these key areas that you want, and let the experts come up with something to wow you.
Because as Gary was talking, I have 3 little ones. My daughter had really poor health, and so they needed therapists, and we were on a wait list. paying cash for 2 years because there's just not enough pediatric therapists. And so if they got a wait list, what you said, 400 long in Lincoln alone?
Yeah,
Part of that is you probably don't have someone to even render the services, right?
that's why we need to pay our staff more so we don't lose them.
Right.
And then we also need to hire more people. And just hiring one person giving raises to be competitive, we're talking $250,000.
I don't know that we could do like the staff, we can't do the pay staff administrative costs, but maybe we can be creative in how we can structure and leverage to focus on a particular age group or a particular adverse experience. Or I thought of the schools because that's where resources are concentrated that really are equitable. They hit all of the kids whose parents don't even know maybe that they can access a therapist. So maybe the school district has a bunch of money and that's just not where they're prioritizing their funds. But maybe they're open to partnership. I don't know. If we haven't had those discussions, how would I know?
We'll seek it out.
Thank you. If there's nothing else on this, we'll go, Gary, you had something more?
Yeah,
Of course you can.
I just wanted to quickly respond to two things. The reason I brought up the mass shootings in the schools and mass shootings in general is we're seeing the children are coming in. So the work that we're providing now is preventing potential mass shootings. So going to the school or coming to Lighthouse, you're still reaching, for the most part, the population. We're already here and we're the experts and we've been doing it since 2005. Before that, we were under the auspices of the school district, but then we pulled away and formed our own 501c3. You mentioned about administrative costs. So if we're funding a clinician, a counselor, it's not administrative costs. Those are program costs, and that we're paying those salaries and they're providing the service. So that is a program cost.
But would they only provide services to Lincoln residents?
We track that. We know exactly how many people that we serve. We would not bill ARPA or allocate any ARPA funds to anyone that lived outside of Lincoln. We track that. We know where everyone lives. We get their zip codes. And I wanted to say, in terms of administrative costs, we're one of the most efficient nonprofits in the United States. Our administrative costs are less than 2%. Less than 2 cents of every dollar we spend goes to administration. Less than 2 cents of every dollar that we spend goes to fundraising. More than 96 cents of every dollar we spend goes to programming. So I would put that against any nonprofit in the United States. To give you an idea, Kids First, and not to pick on Kids First, they're at 81 cents of every dollar goes to programs. We're at 96 cents. And they do exactly what we do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak again.
Brings up a good point when we talk about our criteria though. Because if we're gonna put public dollars out there for use, we might want to have like some sort of threshold of how much of those funds actually go to program costs.
Usually Gary runs a very efficient operation, obviously, but typically it's 10%.
That's what I'm saying, like, but we might want to cap that. So if it's, and then my other question, not to belabor.
Want to set it at 4%.
You're like, I knew it was coming, just talk.
And go so.
I know I've talked to you a lot about this, Sean, before. I don't think that city does a terribly great job of outreaching to our non-English speaking minority population. And I don't even know if we know what the needs are, but I think that it would be nice if we tried to find out. And we also tried to find out the best way to not only address it, but to then have them access it, right? Because we could put something together and they still, like a tree falls in the forest, doesn't hear it. But I would like to include that component personally.
Well, are you saying that the emotional needs of Spanish language speakers are different than?
No, I think I'm saying the exact opposite, but we don't outreach to that community. So anything that we're doing, they might have no idea. So if we're not making sure that we're aware of who they are and how to get our messaging out, how are they going to access what we're doing?
Well,
they don't. I know they don't.
You're saying if there is a nonprofit out there that's Spanish speaking, they would not know that this program is going to be available because the availability is to the large provider.
I'm saying that I want to ensure not to use words that might trigger someone, but I do think we need to be careful or more careful about making sure that what we're doing is equitably accessed. I don't think we do a great job on that.
I know.
And I'd like to do a better one. I think that's all I was saying.
I would say that I agree with you,
Yeah.
but I would say then that I would make that one of the criteria for selection of.
That's what I'm saying is I'd like to ensure that we are being
Right. Not that we-
mind to it that I
Right,
don't think that we really have.
No, you're right.
And I think we should. And if we have the opportunity where we're going to do this, particularly when we're talking mental health and we're talking children and needs, let's just be sure that we're.
So my note says sub-criteria, making sure outreach is available and spread to hard-to-reach population.
Yeah. And that we have the right messenger for it.
Yeah, careful when you ask for direction from this group. You're going to get.
No, this is
I
exactly
was like,
what I
maybe you
need.
could.
Honestly,
Melissa and-
makes life a lot easier when you're building.
Yeah,
Shorter.
you've got some great thoughts.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna
Fire other
build,
thoughts.
I'm gonna probably build and bring forward the micro grant component.
There you go.
Because that's easy.
Yep.
This one is a little bit more work, but I can have it done in in June, so.
All right. Well, we ran about an hour longer than intended, but I think it was a good conversation overall.
But we're ending at the exact time we always do.
That is true. All right. We have council initiated business left. Is there any council initiated
Besides, you
business?
couldn't get a word as a vice mayor.
All right. If there is nothing else, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Sir, what are your